All right, Los Angeles Chargers fans. Joe and Bob here from Local Football Flavor. We're trying to figure out the Chargers offseason at this moment in time. The Chargers coming out of a very, very sad loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars at the end of last season. Coming into the offseason, there's a lot of things that the Chargers need to figure out. We need to figure out the defense. We need to figure out what's going on there. We need to figure out what is happening with the pass catchers in Los Angeles. And we need to figure out how we're going to keep Justin Herbert upright. And probably one of the most important things that needs to be figured out is also that run game. One of the things that the Chargers did this season that I think most Chargers fans will agree is a solid move is they dumped Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator. Now, we on Local Football Flavor love talking about coaches, and particularly coaches that have done their job poorly. And Joe Lombardi is one of those coaches. As Joe and I have said in a previous episode, the Chargers' offense was very lacking in a lot of games, and they did shine in a couple of games, but it was against poor opponents, and they took advantage of those poor opponents. But when you have an All-Pro at running back, you have a potential future Hall of Famer at quarterback, and you have some solid guys on the outsides at wide receiver and a great tight end. You should be able to put teams away, and the Chargers just didn't do that. And so you ask yourself as a fan, well, what do I want to happen to this team? And the number one thing has already happened. You got rid of the offensive coordinator. You brought in somebody else. Now, we always talk about, okay, when this shift happens, how is it going to change a team? Well, hopefully the way that Justin Herbert plays is not necessarily going to change. Other than this coach might be able to keep his players healthy and might not put them in bad positions that they're going to get hurt. And thinking about all of those things when we talk about the Chargers is very important. The second thing when it comes to the Chargers is Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler has been a guy that the Chargers have relied on both through the air and on the ground. As we said in a previous episode, he was their most targeted player, both in the backfield as a running back and as a wide receiver whenever he would go and receive the ball. He had 107 catches this year out of 127 targets. So he's a fairly reliable target, and he's going to get you yards through the air and on the ground. But the problem with Austin Eckler is the problem that, unfortunately, the Chargers have faced since they've gotten rid of LaDainian Tomlinson, and LaDainian Tomlinson has retired. Not gotten rid of, since he's retired, is they've been trying to find what's going to work in that backfield. At some point in time, they had Ryan Matthews. That was okay for a little bit, but it wasn't the answer. They had Melvin Gordon, but Melvin Gordon had fumbling problems. And so you go through this list of players that the Chargers had, and you go back, and there wasn't really a satisfying answer until you get to LaDainian Tomlinson. And that's a Hall of Famer, once-in-a-lifetime kind of player. And the Chargers right now have a really great, talented player, but the way that the team uses him, Joe, and you can speak on this a little bit more, he wants to get paid as a top young player in the league, but the man's about to turn 28, and he doesn't crack 1,000 yards rushing. He's not cracking 1,000 yards receiving. What do you do with him?
Yeah, because he's not really a slot receiver either. I mean, you can make the argument that you could use him like that, but that's taking away the value of his game off the field. So the age is a very real problem when we look at this. And going back through the running backs that you just mentioned, the Chargers' history, part of the reason LaDainian Tomlinson stands out, aside from obviously the fact he's a Hall of Famer, was that was the only era that they weren't purely a finesse offense. And this is fundamentally the problem that the Chargers are living in right now. They are not an offense that can go in the dirt and grind out a win. They're not capable of that. They are the opposite of that. Like, you think of teams that always win their division and are always in it. Tennessee does that. New England does that. That's what Tampa was when they were on fire. I mean, yeah, Brady did stuff, but they were a running team. So when you look at it, even their best running plays are finesse outside, hope you can beat someone to a corner plays, which is a great option, but it's like living on a diet that only consists of carbs. You'll like it, you'll like experiencing it, but when you look in the mirror, you're not exactly going to be proud of the outcomes. That's basically what the San Diego Chargers are. And I'm going to look at this from saying you're not going to overnight change from a finesse team to a power team unless you change something dramatically. Well, Lombardi certainly is a big part of that, because when we look at other teams that there's kind of modeled around, they aren't really all that different from the Packers of about 3 or 4 years ago. Talented receivers, multifaceted running back. But the thing that the Packers had on offense that the Chargers aren't willing to do is they are willing to run the ball and get 4 yards and that be okay. Not every single play needs to be a home run. And they're on the border of it, by the way, the Packers are. But that's a Rodgers thing more so than anything else. When we look at the Chargers, they're in that same light of I need everything to be a perfect home run now, and that's what we're going for. And that is where offensive linemen get exposed because when you're constantly on defensive mode, which is what pass blocking is by definition, the defense is attacking you as an offensive lineman. It is hard to stay intact for the whole year if you're never allowed to fight back. And the biggest problem with the Chargers, since they so rarely fight back, it's a muscle they don't really exercise, and they don't do it because they're not good at it. And then it becomes this circular vortex of failure. We're not good at it, so we don't try it. We don't try it because we're not good at it, and it just keeps making us worse and worse. And you went through on our episode on Monday about they abandoned the run super fast for no reason. And the thing that I want to highlight here in the what to do in the offseason, because they really haven't addressed this, is when you are a team with a lead, you should be generating sacks like crazy. And yes, you have one of the Bosa brothers, and he's a top 5 athlete by himself in terms of pass rushers. But the sacks production is not there. And if I'm looking at the Chargers saying, how can I fix this team immediately tonight at the draft? My answer, first and foremost, is pressure. Because it doesn't matter how many holes you have on your defense. If you are creating pressure on the opposing quarterback, they erase the holes.
Mm-hmm.
Pressure is the universal eraser of holes on defense. And if I'm sitting here as the Chargers, as much as we've talked about how Herbert needs protection, he needs an offensive line help, the entire defense can take a major step forward and a team step forward if you can get someone who's going to give you 40 pressures a year. And again, it's not sacks, it's pressures. Because if you're producing the pressures, all of a sudden people aren't finding the wide open holes and picking you apart.
Well, here's
And
the thing,
also
too.
now
Though.
you can preserve a lead. It becomes much scary to fall behind a team when you know they can sack you the entire fourth quarter. So if I'm the Chargers sitting here tonight at draft night, my number one need, my number one desire is a incredible pressure creator to go opposite of Joey Bosa because the team does not have one right now. And if you put that on this team, because again, it is talented. It really is in a lot of like both LA teams are. They have superstars, but they also have a lot of scrubs. And if you put a superstar pressure there with Bosa, all of a sudden Derwin James looks a whole lot better whenever he's making plays because when people are scrambling, running for their lives, the ball becomes more predictable about where it goes. That's part of the NFL. It's part of the game. Mm-hmm. So Derwin James now knows the ball's going here. He gets more interceptions. Defense looks better. And all of this is a cyclical effect. So I look at this team and say they need to get the edge rusher probably more so than any other team entering into tonight's draft. That marriage of need and what they are and their desperation for it. No one else should be looking at any other position than pass rusher for the Chargers, and that includes offensive line.
Well, so here's the thing too, Joe, is that as you're speaking about pressure, as you're speaking about marriages, there was an SI article that came out a couple of months ago where they interviewed both Staley and the new offensive coordinator, Kellen, who was the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that the two of them said consistently was this idea of marriage and offensive pressure is that you continue to keep your foot on the gas. You continue to make sure that you are putting pressure on the other person's defense to make decisions that are bad decisions for them and good decisions for
Mm-hmm.
you. And one of the things that Kellen Moore is hoping to do that he shared in that article was that he's hoping to marry a lot of different styles together because they do, like we have said, have talent, but that talent is underutilized or not utilized to the degree that they think that they should be. And so when you look at what Moore did with a guy like Tony Pollard,
Mm-hmm.
where you're taking, I don't think we're going to see the Chargers turn into this power run team
No.
just because of the way that Moore coaches is that, when you saw this Dallas team under his play calling, Dak did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You saw Tony Pollard in the mix. You saw Zeke in the mix. You saw, the tight end getting involved in Dalton Schultz. So if you posit this over to the Chargers, I mean, to be honest with you, the Chargers do kind of feel like a like a Dallas light to a degree. And so
They're a finesse version of Dallas.
yeah, it feels like that coaching shift could help them elevate that offense to a level in which they're not taking their foot off the gas. They're continuing to move the ball down the field. They're putting pressure
Well,
on
a
continuously.
key thing needs to be pointed out here that we've neglected in both of our episodes so far. They need to stop going for it on fourth down and putting their defense in horrible position.
That too. But that all starts with first and second down.
It
And
does, but it also starts with Staley and stops with Staley.
yes, but if you are continuing to move the ball on first and second down, you're never going to get to fourth down.
Well, this is the argument for why the Chargers are, why there's Charger fans out there saying, why would we go pass rusher? We should protect ourselves and just prepare to play every game 63-62 like it's Madden and 10-year-olds are going at it. Well, that's what the Chargers are built for, so go for it. You lose first and second down at the offensive line. And as I said in the beginning of this episode, the offensive line can win a game by running the ball. They lose games, they lose each play when they're getting attacked in pass blocking plays.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you overcome this? Power running. Are they going to become that? Not with Ekler. So really, are we going to bring in a power running back and put him on the field over Ekler? Like, are we putting a fourth-round draft pick on the field instead of Ekler? No. No one in the world is ever doing that. As long as, Bob, you nailed it on the head, as long as Ekler is still there, this will be a finesse offense. And therefore, I'm accepting that as an outsider looking at the Chargers. I'm saying finesse offense, fine. Peyton Manning ran a finesse offense for years. But at the end of the day, Dwight Freeney was able to take care of it. And Bosa, as good as he is, cannot do it by himself.
Mm-hmm.
If you give me a second person who can equal Bosa, then all of a sudden your defense gets sacks instead of the defensive holding penalty doesn't get made because the quarterback was sacked before you could hold. And that's the difference that you can overcome with this team. I wouldn't try to do it with corners. You're not going to get good enough of them anyway. You can do it with one pass rusher.
We've talked about this with the Steelers. We've talked about this with a couple other teams, is that TJ Watt is so proficient and amazing and feels immediately like a Hall of Famer because the team plays differently when he is on the field versus when he is not on the field.
But for people to block him, it's a big deal. That's what people are doing to Bosa. Someone should be blowing up the other side.
The Steelers' backfield, in terms of their defensive backfield, is not it. It's not it. And so He makes that
Sorry, Detroit.
backfield.
Something's not that good.
He gets them the opportunity to become good enough that the game is close enough. And the Steelers, unfortunately, don't have an offense enough to do what they needed to do. But this all changes when we talk about the Chargers. The Chargers' offense is good enough and really great at times
Yeah.
that if you do what you said and you pair up Bosa with another guy, and it's similar to what Detroit did, where you have Hutchinson and Houston putting pressure on people. Now, they're young, so they're not going to be as polished or as good. But if you have someone that can go opposite Bosa, and then you take a little bit of that pressure off the backfield, and you then say to Patrick Mahomes, on the 2 times that you play him in the year, Patrick Mahomes, we got you. Then you go to Russell Wilson and we say, Russell Wilson, we know you crumble under pressure. We got you. Then you go to whoever's playing over in Oakland and you say, or Vegas, and you say, we got you too. You all of a sudden split these series against Kansas City, and you take the series from Denver, and you also take the series from Vegas. This totally changes the season for you, and it gives you enough confidence to say, I'm not going to blow this lead because I haven't done it before, and I'm not going to do it again, and it doesn't matter who faces me. Now, there's a lot of people that are a proponent of the Chargers taking a pass catcher in the first or second round, and I don't dispute
Second
that
round's fine.
I don't dispute that they need one because the health of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen is a big question mark for this team.
Yeah, it is.
Josh Palmer is serviceable, but
He's
they
more
don't
than that.
have a healthy number one. What I mean is Palmer's not a number one.
No, he's not.
You need someone big and tall and fast as a number one. You need another,
which is what the 2 they have are. They just keep getting hurt. And Keenan Allen and Mike Williams.
And when those players are on the field, this offense cooks. When it's on the field, it cooks. But when it's not, and I see that. But to your point, it's similar. It's similar to the Michael Thomas situation that New Orleans has. Is that you have a supremely good, talented player on your team that can't stay healthy, but you can't get rid of him because he commands a good part of your contracts.
There's a giant difference between Keenan Allen, though, and Michael Thomas. No, Keenan Allen likes football, wants to play it.
I'm not talking about personality. I'm talking about ability to stay on the field, and this goes for Mike Williams and Keenan Allen.
Mike Williams
both of them
catches
have a big
balls like he's doesn't care about his body.
He doesn't.
Like when we were talking to our Detroit guy about Calvin Johnson, the closest person in the NFL right now who sacrifices himself regularly to make catches is Mike Williams. And yeah, he brings in some amazing stuff, but it's not exactly gentle. And when I look at this, that's another argument to run the ball a little bit more. Let's save the body of our best weapons and use it. Now, does that mean that you're putting 87 gas into a Ferrari? At times, yeah, it might. But at the end of the day, it just matters that it's still running when the playoffs start, and you'll be able to race it when the playoffs are there. It doesn't matter if it's the fastest car at Thanksgiving. It matters is, does your Ferrari make it to the playoffs? And when it's there, is it ready to go?
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, it's obviously a Lombardi thing. All he did was throw the ball, regardless of how bad his offensive line was. His ineptitude to change was only rivaled by Baltimore's defensive coordinator. Like, it was obvious, and he just wasn't willing to do it. And it's so perplexing.
And here's the thing: when Mike Williams is on the field catching the balls, and when Keenan Allen is there, I think one of those things that Kellen Moore will help do is that, particularly in Dallas, when you think about Dallas's offensive prowess versus defensive prowess, you have a team that could be explosive at certain points in time, and then totally fall off the wagon. And like I said, there are many similarities that I see in the Chargers and the Cowboys. Beating up on bad teams when you need to, losing to good teams when the opportunity arises, blowing leads, blowing games. I mean,
Well, no one
there's
blows a lead as good as the Chargers. I mean,
no.
let's not give Dallas too much credit here.
That's been factual proof for a long time now.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that, like you said, this team is not going to be fixed in a day, in a month, in a week, in a year. But I gotta say that out of the teams that made the playoffs this year, they're a team that I am almost the least optimistic about, to be honest with you. Is that they were a sneaky 10-win team.
That they were.
But they shouldn't have been. They should have been a very good 11-12 team win team.
Which makes me wonder, and
I should have been paying attention to them more. I shouldn't be going through the season and be like, wow, the Chargers made the playoffs.
You shouldn't have this outside thought like maybe Detroit's in a better situation. Like that thought should never cross your mind, but it's not unreasonable. And this gets to a bigger question, and we hit upon it. You kind of teed it up earlier. Maybe they didn't fire enough coaches, and maybe Staley is really the problem. Going for it on fourth down all the time, not getting it nearly as much as people think he is, and leaving his team exposed. Because a part of this is not being able to put teams away is becoming reliant upon going for it on fourth down. It's a mindset thing, but it's a very risky gamble. And yeah, it looks pretty good in the playoffs, when Belichick does it and you win. But it's kind of like how baseball is. In the playoffs, they'll use their closer for 3 innings because why not? In the playoffs for football, it's like you need to win now, so going for it on fourth is fine. But you can't build a culture around that and be a finesse team.
Right.
It doesn't work in the long run together. It's different if you're the Eagles and you can sit down and say, 1 yard, we're a power team, we getting this, no questions asked. That's different. It doesn't work like that with finesse teams. And that's really where I overall as an outsider watching the Chargers am amazed, like flat out amazed that Staley didn't lose his job. And I think that might be the biggest crutch entering in the next season. Obviously, the offense is dictated by Ekler or not in that GM decision of keeping him or not. But in terms of on-field production, I get a feeling we might be having this exact same conversation next year because I don't see Staley changing. And as long as he has the gig, this is where we're at.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that's why I'm the least optimistic about this team. Because if you look at Staley's record, since he's been with them since 2021, they're 19-15.
Yeah.
It feels like
and
the
they're
Los
0-6 against the Chiefs.
It feels like the Los Angeles Chargers story has moved now, and they've taken that disappointment that was in San Diego, and they've transitioned it to Los Angeles, and they've kept everything exactly the same. They've just changed the names. But the story of the Los Angeles Chargers for many, many a year now has been this team should be better. This team should not lose leads in the fourth quarter. This team should make the playoffs every year. This team is good offense.
There should also be more discipline.
And it just year in and year out, you're always sitting here, at least we are in Pittsburgh, in the 4:30, 4:25 window. We always will have San Diego / Los Angeles Chargers games on our television.
They're fun watches because they're going to blow a game.
From 2001 to like 2015. Then all of a sudden, they started saying, once Kansas City got Patrick Mahomes, they're like, Patrick Mahomes, you're the 425 game. Whoever you're playing, you're watching. Or we end up getting Dallas or Philadelphia on Fox. And so the thing about the Chargers that makes them a team you want to watch, well, most of the country isn't seeing that because of the way they're being coached. And I don't want to watch the Chargers at 425 play Houston in a game where the Chargers should beat them, but then I turn it on and an hour into the game, Houston's beating them. That doesn't even make any sense. And so when we think about the Chargers in the offseason here, they haven't done enough. They haven't done enough to make their team better because they're a team at 10-7 who those 7 losses were bad losses.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't made their team
27-0.
They haven't made their team good enough to say to me that, and they haven't made enough changes and they haven't gotten enough health to say that this team is going to do any better than they did last season. And that,
Yeah, this literally is the same conversation we had. Because when we look at the end of the 2021 season, the Chargers did not make the playoffs that year because of Staley's decision to call a timeout against the Raiders. And then the Raiders ultimately ended up kicking a field goal and knocked out. They were the last game of the year. And it really does bring me back to the conversation we had 2 weeks ago now with the Detroit Lions. Dan Campbell learned what he was doing was hurting his team, and he immediately changed. Staley has not learned that. And I wonder, just from an outside speculation, is throwing Lombardi on the fire and firing him a smoke and mirrors more so than solving the problem?
Well, you know the answer to that question is that the first one to go is always the offensive or defensive coordinator.
Not always.
I mean,
there's plenty of teams that just fire them all.
If you're that bad. But the thing is that you may, at least in Staley's case, and this is speculation, of course, maybe he got a pass for making the playoffs last year. Maybe they're going to have one more year.
Race with 27-0.
But I've got to tell you this. If that record is still hovering around 500 next year, Goose is cooked, man, because you can't have a middling coach with the talent level of a guy like Ekler and Herbert on your team middling around with guys like that. That's how you turn into the Dallas Cowboys.
I'm not even sure he's middling.
That's how you turn into the Cowboys. That's true.